Hi, I'm Lee Baucom. Thank you for being here for this series, for this episode of the series, or today's start. We're going to be talking about marriage during this series. The title of this is Building a Great Marriage. And that's what we want to talk about. How do you create that great marriage, even if maybe you didn't know exactly how to do that up until now? We're going to talk about why you might not have known how to do that up until now, and we're going to fix that. So I want you to just imagine that this is like building something. That's kind of the reason for that metaphor. We're building something. So you have to go through some steps to build something. I've never built a house, but I know enough to know that there are some steps to that process, and you want to do it piece by piece. You don't suddenly have a house that's just perfectly built. You have to put the work in, and that's kind of what happens in a marriage too. So first, let me talk a little bit about myself. I once was live and in person right next door to the church. And in fact, I've done lots of live and in person different classes at the church. St. Francis was my neighbor of my office for a number of years when I was working with Kilgore Samaritan Counseling Center. I started there back in 1996. It was actually October of 1996. So we're coming right up on that 24 years, except for I've been away for a number of years now, about 5 years. At that point, I stepped away. I worked full time there, working with families, with individuals, with couples, as they were working through life. And I worked with Kilgore Samaritan Counseling Center, as I mentioned, and decided that at one point I got too busy. Part of the reason was because I was doing lots of other things. So since not being at St. Francis, I've written a fair number of books. There's a stack of the ones that I've written so far and a couple of others that aren't in this stack. Couple of ebooks. I've created a couple of online courses. I do a lot of relationship coaching and Thrive coaching also in addition to that. And I have a couple of podcasts that I do. One podcast, Save the Marriage. So that's why I'm here talking about marriage. And the other is Thriveology. How do you thrive in the midst of life? And let's just face it, this is a day, this age is a great time to be thinking about how do we thrive, because that's not when life is going well and when there are no roadblocks and no difficulties. But how do you keep moving forward when things get tough? Not long ago, I was with you for a series on how do you cope with COVID, and that was part of it. How do you thrive through that process? So that's me, a little bit about me. A couple of other facts about me. Both of my kids were involved in the youth group at St. Francis coming along. My wife and I have been married now we just celebrated our 32nd wedding anniversary. So if you're wondering, do I have a clue what I'm talking about? Yes. Does that mean we have a perfect marriage? There's no such thing. You're constantly in the process of working on things. In my spare time, I like to paddleboard. Up until COVID, I was doing jujitsu. I also do trail running and lots of other activities. But by and large, my daily task is helping to people to thrive, whether it's in their life or in their marriage, which is what brings us to this topic. So building a great marriage. We're here for the next 6 weeks. Well, there's one break in between. The first weekend in October will be St. Francis Day, and so we won't meet that week, but we'll meet the next 3 weeks, this week and the next couple of weeks of September, and then we'll pick up again in October after that first week and follow through pretty much for the rest of October. During those weeks, each week, I want to talk about one piece of how you build it. So there's one foundation, and then there are 4 cornerstones. So now we're into that metaphor of building a house. You can have lots of different cool stuff you want to put in your house. You may get to choose what that outside looks like and what the inside looks like and what kind of roof you get and all those other things. But you better have a really good foundation, and you better have those cornerstones in place so that everything's square and everything fits. And so it's the same with building a marriage. These are the elements you need to have. The foundation that we're going to talk about is at the very core. If you're, recently my family, we finally had a change of scenery. We went to the beach. My parents have a place that's fairly close to the beach, puts us into the sandy soil. And so over the years, I've watched these people who are building their homes there. And what I notice is they have to sink down their pillars until they hit something solid. it's all sandy there. So they have to find that place to build a foundation. Now, at the beach, there's no basement, so it kind of kills the metaphor here. But here I sit in my house, and they had to figure out where to put the foundation. We know what happens if you don't have a firm foundation for a home. We've probably all seen houses that had the settling issues where, starting to crack down. And recently saw a house at the beach that had happened. They didn't get quite the pillars deep enough, and it was basically kind of coming in apart. Well, that's the same thing. If we don't have a firm foundation of our life and marriage, then we're going to have a hard time building up from there. Everything's going to crumble if we don't have that firm foundation. So the first thing we're going to do is create that firm foundation. And then we're going to back up and put those 4 cornerstones in place so that we know how to move forward and how to build that relationship, how to build that marriage. So that's what we're looking forward to. Each segment, I'm trying to make it long enough to make sure we cover the information, but not so long that you lose it watching Zoom. We're all Zoom tired these days. We're Zoom exhausted because so much is happening on Zoom and online that sometimes it just wears us out. So I want to be as concise and as direct as possible, but I want to make sure that we get that information in. So first of all, let's back up a minute and talk a little bit about what's happening with marriages, why our marriage is in trouble. You probably are like most marriages. You and your spouse probably decided to get married because you fell in love. I mean, that is what happens for the most part in our country. People fall in love and decide that they want to link up together. So why is it that if we have this love that we're sure is going to conquer all, that just under half of marriages fail? I say just under. We throw out that statistic of 50%. It's really not. It's more about 48%, which is close enough. But let's call it a coin toss. And so if we're going to say which marriages fail, which ones succeed, coin toss is statistically the way we do it. But I don't think that's really right, because it's not just a coin toss. It's what do we put into the relationship? It's not luck that marriages work out. And by the way, when we use that, basically half and half, we're not even looking at the ones that have like a happy marriage. I'm pretty sure that if they went through the divorce process, almost all of them had an unhappy marriage. But of the other 50%, it's not like we can say, oh, they all have a great happy marriage. That's not necessarily the case. So then we have to kind of back up and say, what's happening then? I mean, people have been getting married for millennia. So why are we still struggling with how to make it work? Let's kind of talk about some reasons why marriages get into trouble. First of all, purely lack of knowledge. I mean, if you wanted to do almost anything else in life, let's say you wanted to go drive a car, what do? You go take driving lessons. You have to learn how to drive. Or let's say you want to own a gun. You have to go get a license to carry that gun. Or let's say you want to learn something in your trade. You want to be a plumber or electrician or a doctor or an attorney, and you have to go get a license to get that done. You have to show that you know what to do. And then we set this thing up where all you have to do is go down, pay a little bit of money, sign a few things, and walk away with your marriage license, giving you permission to be married. It's a lack of knowledge that is the first problem. I mean, did you go to a class where somebody told you how to be married? I did go to a class about that, but it was only because of what I had chosen to study. That was the only reason that I was ever in a class that talked about how do we be married. Most people don't. I ended up getting a Ph.D. in how do you work on marriages. But the starting point of my wife and I getting married, there was no class involved. We got a license. We did have to go to a few premarital sessions. That was our choice where we went. When I was at St. Francis, I saw lots of, and I might have even seen you, depending on when you got married. And if you got married at St. Francis, I might have even seen you in my office getting ready to get married. But here's the tough thing. That lack of knowledge translates over to people going, oh, we're different. We have this love thing down. It's one of those kind of those myths of marriage that your love is going to beat it, right? And so, yeah, you see these others, and this is kind of our unbounded hopefulness in the midst of love, where we go, oh, our love is different. Yeah, 50% of relationships crumble, but our love is different. We've got it right. We know how to avoid those things. Statistically speaking, that isn't the case. So part of the beginning point is we don't even understand in our culture what a strong marriage is. We don't even understand the core parts of why a marriage works and how to deal with struggles and what the core is. And so we have this basic lack of knowledge. You might read some books, but you usually don't read a book until your marriage is in trouble. One of my first programs on the internet was Save the Marriage, and it still is one that day to day is one that I'm involved in all the time. And so in Save the Marriage, one of the things that I set out to do was originally to write a book about being married, just having a great marriage, how to have a thriving marriage. The problem is nobody gets started then. Hopefully that's what you're doing now. You're breaking the mold. You're finding some ways of getting ahead of that. But for the most part, most people don't do anything until they're in trouble. So now there are books that we can get, but by that time we're playing catch up. We've already gotten into bad habits. We've already formulated some difficult things. And more than that, some of those books become so theoretical that it's hard for us to figure out how do we implement that. So we want to talk about some implementation things through this process. In fact, I would like for you now, while you're listening to me kind of do some of this introductory stuff, grab a pen and paper. And this is for each person, not like, oh, my spouse will take the notes, because I've got a couple of exercises that each of you need to do in order to get that together. And by the way, you can do these exercises by yourself. It'll be very helpful in you understanding where you're moving forward if your spouse isn't involved in this. But if your spouse is involved, how much more powerful it is for both of you. Okay, so first of all, lack of knowledge. We just don't have this core piece of information that floats around as much as we have information around us. What generally happens is people go down, they get their marriage license. Maybe they do a couple of sessions with a premarital counselor that they think that they don't really need to listen to because they've already figured it out. So they only half listen to them. And they're like, well, the church made me do it. And even if they thought they were listening, they're listening to it going, yeah, but we already have this thing beat. So we've got this in place. So there's the lack of knowledge. So then what happens? You set up your date, you get married, everybody pats you on the back. Maybe you have a really big party, maybe you have a really small party, but somewhere along the way, they pat you on the back and send you out the door to go figure it out. So here it is, probably the most important relationship in your life, in your adult life, the most important one. And nobody tells you what to do other than saying, go figure it out. On the job training. I mean, I don't know about you, but the last thing I want to have happen is to go in the doctor's office and go, him go or her go, I've never done this before, but I'll figure it out as I go. Or the electrician, him or her, coming to wire my house going, yeah, I've never really done this, but I'll figure it out as I go, right? We want a knowledge base before we step into trying to figure that out. So knowledge base, that's the first issue we have. And so this series is kind of designed for us to get beyond that, to talk about how we move beyond that stuck place by giving some information, some pretty clear information that I've seen work over and over. When you focus on building these pieces, then you can get the marriage you want, even if your marriage has been struggling. It does take one piece, and that is to move to a place of forgiveness. And that is a warning that we're given in the Bible about how marriages suffer because of hardness of heart. In other words, somebody can't let go of something. So we'll come back to that. Okay, another reason that we have marriages in such difficulty is lack of experience. This is you're experiencing a successful marriage in your life, like in your childhood. There's so much of what we understand about life that comes from those childhood experiences. So let's say you came from a household that you didn't see a great marriage. Your parents didn't have a great marriage. So you saw their example. And you may have left going, I don't want that, but that doesn't really tell you what you do want. So lack of experience in seeing it if they had a bad marriage. But let me tell you another piece. Let's say your parents had a great marriage. You probably didn't see why they did. It happened behind closed doors. And I don't mean just bedroom doors. That may have been a part of it, but the other piece was it happens in subtle, small ways that you wouldn't see from the outside necessarily. So most of us don't have a lot of experience in seeing where that comes from. My own family growing up, my parents did have a very loving marriage, but I didn't always see where that came from. I've asked them more recently. I had a chance to sit down and interview them more recently and could see how they put it together, but it wasn't apparent to my child eyes. My grandparents had a great marriage. My other grandparents had a good marriage. Then I had aunts and uncles that didn't have such great marriages. And that's part of what inspired me to go, how can I help marriages be better? Because I saw the destructive experience of that. What happened to my cousins? What happened to my aunts and uncles when their marriages got in trouble? So that reminds me of how hard it is for us to have had positive experiences. We struggle with knowing even what that looks like. So those are two big reasons that marriages get into trouble. Now I want to point to one that I think happens every day. And this is the one where I want you to think about how it happens in your relationship. This is what I call the pause button marriage. This is where a couple gets married in love. They've been dating each other. They've been kind of pursuing each other. And then pause. They hit the pause button. Now, the pause button can be there for a number of different reasons. And it's not that these are bad reasons. For instance, a big pause button happens when people have kids. They go, oh, we're going to be parents now. We'll come back to being a couple sometime when the kids go to school, when we get them potty trained, when they go to kindergarten, when they're out of the nest, when they finally have their career launch, when whatever, right? There's something in parenting that is when they finally get there, then we'll know that we've got this and we can come back to us. So that's one reason we hit the pause button. But there are other reasons. For instance, let's say you go on to school, like if you go to med school or if you go to law school or some other school, maybe even get married before you go to college. And so you're dealing with all of that, or somewhere along the way, you continue on education or a job course. And so you're like, man, I got to pour myself into that. Pause. Now, I can tell you, when we graduated from college, that's when my wife and I got married. We were both going to grad school. We knew we wanted to be married, and we were ready to jump into that. And we were young. But we jumped into it anyway, and we went off to grad school together. And so I had grad school, she had grad school, I had work, she had work, and then somehow it was supposed to be us being a couple. And it was a strain. It wasn't because we didn't want to. Sometimes you hit the pause button because you feel like you have to. Your priorities kind of get spread out. So my wife got a master's, I got a master's, and then another master's, and then a Ph.D. And along the way, we had 2 kids. And at one point, I think I had 5 offices I could potentially be at between where I needed to be at school, where I was also teaching, and where I was doing my training, and where I was doing my work, and where I was loaned out to another person to do work. And then I had another place that I had to be for part-time. And so in all of those, there were days when I would go, where am I supposed to be, right? I mean, just in that point in life can be very busy. Pause button. Another reason sometimes we hit pause button is like, we're doing things that are really exciting. People who are involved in athletics and, trying to get to a certain point before age catches up, or maybe it's friends. You're like, okay, I've got the marriage thing now. Now I'm going to spend some time with friends or with travel or with hobbies or interest or wherever. Pause. We hit pause. Now, here's the myth. You can pause a relationship and come back later and unpause it, and it will just have been in suspended animation. That's the myth. In reality, relationships go one of two ways. They are either growing or receding. We're either getting closer or further away. That's it. There's no stable, there's no static. So even if, let's say, you don't see any huge changes in your relationship, you're learning little pieces about each other when you're in connection with each other. Or let's say you're on the other side where you've disconnected, hit pause, you've hit disconnection, and it begins to wane. It begins to starve the relationship. Pause button is dangerous because connection is the lifeblood. We're going to talk about this. That's actually one of the cornerstones. Connection is the lifeblood of a relationship. So if you choke out the lifeblood, right? If you close off, let me just give you an example from jiu-jitsu. So in jiu-jitsu, there is a move where someone's behind you and they wrap their arm around you, so their elbow goes to here, arm goes here. You'll notice that gets your carotid arteries. You tap out in jiu-jitsu when you know that you can't get out of whatever they're doing. And so when they have you in that hold, your carotid arteries are closed off. And if you're not careful, you go to sleep. That begins to be a dangerous thing over time, but that's a basic technique in jiu-jitsu. And I've had the experience enough where somebody got me in that position and I could kind of see the room kind of beginning to dark, and I tap and they let go and I'm all good. But what if I didn't tap? What if I didn't realize that there was a threat to my being awake? There was a threat to my consciousness because they were closing off the flow, the lifeblood, the flow. If they close that off, I'm going to sleep. That's just what our body does. And it's the same thing. You know, if you lie on something wrong, might not know it, but you wake up and it's gone numb. So there's this little slight half move in jiu-jitsu that I've done a number of times, and I realized the danger of it because I was only cutting off part of their supply, just had it partially compressed, and they didn't see it coming. I realized it, and I had to let go because they weren't aware of how quickly they were falling asleep. We don't realize we're falling asleep. I recently had a medical procedure, and they had to put me out. And so they're sitting there talking to me, and that person gives me some of the medicine and says, "Do you feel that?" I'm like, "Yeah, I kind of feel it." But I'm still talking to him. And he says, "Do you feel it?" And I'm like, "Can you feel this?" He gave me some more because I'm hard to get down, they tell me. And so they gave me some more, and I was like, "Yeah, I feel that too." But I was still continuing to talk to him. And then I woke up in recovery. There's a whole period of time when I was gone, and that's the problem. We don't see that we're closing off the connection in the relationship. We don't see we're starving it of that connection. And so it goes to sleep. But if you do it long enough, if you starve it long enough, it's not just to sleep, it begins to create damage. And if you do it too long, it kills people, right? I mean, that's the threat of that. And so part of what happens when we hit the pause button is that we stop the connection with each other. And when the connection begins to wane, it begins to cause other problems in the relationship. So when we hit the pause button, which is very common, that sets in motion the fact that our relationship is beginning to deteriorate, even if we didn't know it. Even if with the best of intentions, we're like, you know what? We get the kids out of the house. We are back to being a couple. So what happens in these cases is that as time goes on, you have whatever events is going on that you hit the pause button. The kids are growing up. The hobby's over. You've got to the place in your career, empty nest. You've made this to a certain point in life, and you go, oh, man, time to enjoy life. And you look at each other and go, who are you? What are you about? What do you think about? What do you believe? And you're so far apart. Just even if in the very beginning you started at a state where you both were very much on the same page, same road, same direction. At some point, it wasn't that you went, okay, I'm going this way and you just stay over there. It's that you slowly started following a different path as the light goes down, as it gets dimmer and darker, and you don't see it until you are on opposite sides of the mountain and you don't know how to cross back over. That's the threat of the pause button. So part of what we're talking about is understanding these pieces that need to be in place so that we can keep that from being a problem. And if you've hit the pause button, most people do to some degree, we can figure out how to unpause it now before there's more damage. And if there has been some hurt, some damage, some pain, how do you get back to the place where you're building a marriage that you do want? So those are some pretty common ways of why marriages get into trouble. And this is kind of for you to do a kind of a self-assessment. What do those apply to you? Did you know what it meant to be married? Had you seen that and went, oh, that's why that's a good marriage? Did you hit pause and not realize it? Or maybe you did realize it and just thought we'd come back to that. That's just for you to kind of think through, where is the deficit? So now we get to the place of going, okay, just because those things happen, why do we have 50% of marriages ending? I mean, why don't we figure out a way back, right? Well, I believe in life, there are always three responses we can have to any situation, anything that happens. And this occurred to me one time when I was in a job situation where, honestly, I wasn't happy because of the circumstances of that job. There's no way I could make it work. And I was just very frustrated. I was in another part of town dealing with kids who were not happy to have to come to my office because they had been court ordered. I had been loaned there, really hadn't planned on being my career. And the kids were unhappy. I was unhappy. And I'm sitting there. I remember it was an autumn day and the sun is setting early. And I'm out there by myself in this big building. Last client is left who really was unhappy about being there. And I went, man, what am I doing here? I got to figure this out because I am miserable every day. And it occurred to me I had three options. And I've come to think of them as wait, walk, or work. Wait, walk, work. So here it is. Wait. I had the option of just continuing to come to work, get my paycheck, keep doing my thing, and wait it out for something else. Now, all three of these have times when they make sense. I was trying to get through a Ph.D. program. I was trying to make my way through and keep our family fed. And so there was a reason I could have gone, okay, I'm not happy here, but it's paying the bills. And I could have waited it out. Sometimes we wait it out because you know something better is coming behind it. There's a wait philosophy that might work sometimes. But in a marriage, what that means is you're saying, okay, it's not great where we are, but we're just going to hang in there and keep doing what we've been doing. It's not making us happy, but we'll just keep doing that. Usually doesn't feel real good. The second one is walk. That's what happens when people leave a relationship. Walk away. That was my other thought that night. I could just leave. I could walk. I could turn in my resignation and be done here. Why keep doing this? If I'm not happy, my clients are not happy, they're not getting much out of it, everybody's frustrated. Why not just walk away, pack up, leave? So that was an option. I could walk. And as I sat there and I went, do I wait? Do I walk? Well, actually, what I was thinking at that point, because that came to me later, those three words came to me later. What I was really thinking was, do I just hang in there or do I quit? Do I keep hanging in there or do I quit? But now I would say, wait, walk, wait, walk. And then something occurred to me, and that is what I call the third option. There's almost always a third option in life. And usually the third option gets us out of the binary this or that. It gets us to a place of creativity, and that's the work. What can I do to work on this? Now, when I say work, you might go, oh, that sounds so hard and so boring. Not always, right? If you find the way to make it work in a way that you love, then work is not so bad. So I sat there that day and I went, okay, I've got this big building. I got a quarter of the top floor of this massive building that's completely empty. What if I were to build something that would actually make a difference in people's lives? What if I was to create a program that addressed the needs of the community, that had other people, not just me, but a whole team there? What if we made it in a way where it wasn't just people being forced to be there, but people who wanted to be there that could take advantage of it and figure out how to move forward? What would that look like? That was my work for the next few years when I continued that process and built a whole family services program because I took the third option. Why do I say that? I tend to like third options. So the third option in marriage is don't just suck it up and wait it out. Don't just walk away, but work to transform it into a relationship that works for you. That's really the heart of it. Can we find some ways of rebuilding the structure of the relationship to get where we want to be? How do we do that? That's what I've been trying to figure out over the years, and how to do it most efficiently. Dig that foundation, get those cornerstones. That's the process we're going to talk about in this. There's lots more to it, but we're going to give you the elements so that you can get in a process of working towards that. So let's say that you go, okay, work. That's what we're going to do. Here we are. We're going to work on this. Great. But why would you work? Well, there's some myths that are working against you. There is this myth that I hear all the time, which is basically if this was meant to be, we wouldn't be struggling. It's a very common myth around marriages in trouble. If this was meant to be, I mean, if this was really love, if our marriage was meant to be, and this is really trying to find a reason to leave, if this was meant to be, we wouldn't be struggling. We wouldn't fight. We wouldn't disagree. We wouldn't have a difficult time. It would just all mesh. So where else does that work in life? If I was meant to be a doctor, I'd just have the skills. If I was meant to be an attorney, I would just know law. If I was meant to be a therapist, I would just naturally, know all these things about human behavior. If I were meant to be an electrician, I'd just naturally know how to, where in life do we do that? When I went to jiu-jitsu the first night, it was a couple of years ago. And again, I haven't been able to go for the past half a year, but so 2.5 years ago is when I started. When I first went in, I was looking going, man, they're rolling around in ways that I don't even understand. I'm watching these things. I'm like, I don't even understand. I don't even know what to call that. Now, I could have said, well, if I was meant to do this, I would just naturally be able to jump in and pin someone down. If I was meant to be. Or I could say, you know what, there's no reason for me to know this. There's no reason for this to be working because I got to learn it. That's the whole process of learning it and struggling through something. And notice struggling can be a part of that. How about at the gym? Let's say that you've decided that you want to have bigger muscles, more toned muscles, better shape, your heart be in better shape, whatever. If you go to the gym and you go, well, if I was meant to be, I wouldn't have to be here. No. We work on things. In fact, our growth comes partly from the struggles that we have. And I believe that the struggles in a marriage are part of what gives us the impetus to create a great marriage. It's like the raw material is there. So back to the house metaphor. If it was meant to be, you just throw all that stuff down, they'd come and deliver all the supplies, throw them down, and boom, there'd be a house there. It's just meant to be. No, we do the hard work and figure out the problems as we go and make sure that it's the house that we want to build and the one that's going to be comfortable for us. That's how we do things. But somehow in love, we go, oh, it's not meant to be. So let's get rid of that. That doesn't work. The other one that I often hear is love should be enough. And what they're really talking about is this passion that we have should be enough. We have a biochemical storm that happens when you fall in love. That's what fuels the passion. It's partly adrenaline focused. There's a reason that we call it madly in love. Your brain is acting in some ways insanely, trying to make all sense of all of these feelings that are running around and all these biochemicals, the bath of biochemicals is happening in your brain. So we're like, oh, love conquers all. That's the one I would hear and see and people come to my office. We've got this because we love differently than others do. We all believe that. And yet it's the exact same biochemical bath of our brain that is bringing that to us. And guess what? Our brain gets used to that. And we return to a normal state. At which point we go, we got to figure out life, right? We got to figure out how this is going to all fit together because I'm not feeling quite as googly-eyed as before. I don't have, and this is what Gary Chapman calls the tingles. I don't have the tingles anymore. I don't have that feeling anymore. And then we go, oh, something's wrong. It's not wrong. We just didn't understand the process. love is not enough. We have to have some skills and some knowledge. And we also have to make a change in how we define love. In our culture, we've come to think of love as that passion, that feeling. How I feel is my love. In the Bible, we're told to love our neighbors. I don't think that was about having gushy feelings towards the people we don't like. It was about how we treat them. So we need to change, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that feeling of passion. There's a lot right with that. It's what gets us together, and it's what helps keep us together if we nurture that, and if we keep moving in ways that keep that active. But love is not the feeling. Well, it is a feeling, but it comes because of our love as action. When we are in love as action, we feel loving. I mean, that's kind of what happens even when we're falling in love. We just don't know it. When I met my wife and I thought she's pretty cute, I started trying to make an impression on her and show her that I thought something of her, and over time to show her I like her and then show her I love her. So I'm doing all these actions and I'm going, oh, I feel this. And that's why I want to do the actions. And in reality, it's a cycle that's running into each other. As we keep doing the loving actions, we feel more love. And as we feel more love, we keep doing loving actions until suddenly something changes. Which brings us to, what is this all about? What's the goal? Well, I call it being a we. And I've gotten a lot of press for this and a lot of people saying, oh man, you captured it, right? Because what I say is two people are trying to create a we. We are in this together. We are one. We are a team. I didn't come up with that. Genesis 2:25 says that two people come together and become one flesh. That's a we. So what's the struggle? There's nowhere else in your life that you do that piece. Nowhere else in your life do you try to figure out how to meld in with somebody's life, to be a part with them, to be one with them. Nowhere else in life do you do that. So where else do you have the experience of that? How do you have that knowledge base we talked about, that lack of knowledge, lack of experience? Where else would you have done it? And by the way, people are like, well, I was married before. Unless that person died and now you're moving again, you're often on a next marriage, right? So if you didn't figure it out the first time, it might not have led to a more knowledge base. And this is just the facts, right? I'm not saying there's anything wrong. In fact, I think what's sad is we haven't equipped people with this knowledge. And so, as I often say, well, this is not your fault you're there, but it is your responsibility of what you do from here. Oftentimes we're looking for where can we put the fault rather than how can I be responsible. So let's talk about what that is about. Genesis 2:25. We being one flesh. So what happens at the beginning of a relationship? There's a you and there's a me. My wife, she came down to my room and she said, hey, I hear y'all are going to a movie. And I went, wow, she's cute. And she wants to go on a trip with the group I'm going with. Cool. So I made sure that she rode in my car and that she sat beside me at the theater and that she ate my popcorn and that I talked with her. That was a you and a me. When she walked down, there was a you and there was a me. And over time, it was you, me, you and me, you and me. My brother's father-in-law, my brother's name is Jim. And so my sister-in-law would always refer to the two of them as Jim and I. And so Jim and I is what she meant. But my brother's father-in-law started calling him Gemini because she grouped it together. And I mean, that's a pretty powerful metaphor at that point in their relationship. They were dating, but that's what we become, Jim and I, or you and me. So then we get married, you and me. And why do we marry? Because we want to show this person how much we love them. So we get married with all good intentions. You and me works in a dating relationship, but now we have this life to share together, to build together. And when we get to that level, then we have to make a switch, or it becomes oppositional. You versus me. So part of what happens is you can either see it, we're on the team, or you're against me. Whenever there are two people, it's easy for it to become binary, you against me, rather than a unified front. You've probably seen it on sports teams where, two people seem like they are both out for a different goal of proving that they're number one on the team, rather than going, our win is what we're after. It's the same in marriage. So we're creating a we. It's a pivot that we're going to talk about throughout this. I'm just giving you a frame for this, of understanding that this is about creating a we. We're in this together. But we is about you and me working towards we. So here's where we do a little bit of work. What I want you to do, and this is something you do not need to share with your spouse, and in fact, I would request you not share this with your spouse. What I would like you to do is rate from 1 to 10 where you think your marriage is. 1, like, it's just not there. 10, like, man, it is perfect. We're at 100%. 1 to 10. So think of those in kind of percentage points, but 1 to 10, where do you rate your marriage? Don't spend a whole lot of time. I mean, you can debate this endlessly. Just come up with a number, 1 to 10. So if you're a 10, great. Tell me how you did that. Just send me the information, and we'll put that in a book, and we'll be rich and famous. But if you're below 10, I want you to ask a question. What would it take to move up? What would it take to get to, let's say, 2 spaces above where you are? So if you're at a 6, what would it take to get to an 8? If you're at a 9, you just have 1 more to go. What would it take to get to a 10? If you're at a 3, what would it take to get to a 5? Because what we're trying to do is come up with, where can we move now? What would it take? So this is just for you to kind of get a picture for where things are and where they can move towards. Because here's the thing, and I work with lots of people who are like, 2 or 3. Okay, great. What would it take to get to 2 up? So a 4 or 5. We do that. We get there, and then I go, what would it take to get to a 6 or 7? And then an 8 and a 9. So we can keep moving it up, but we start with what would it take now, given where you are now, what would it take to move forward? And then I want you to hold that and see how that fits in to the next pieces. Okay, so that's exercise number 1. Basically rate it from 1 to 10 and ask yourself the question, what would it take to move a couple of spaces up? What would it take to improve it a couple of spaces? Now, the next piece you want to work on is what I call the marriage vision statement. This is an exercise that you can do together, but you start separate. And you're basically trying to create the vision for your marriage. As we go through, you're going to be defining or refining that as we talk about the foundation next week. And we talk about each of those cornerstones in the next 5 weeks that we're together, or 4 weeks that we're together. You're going to be able to refine that vision statement. But this is the starting point. Okay, so what I want you to do, it's a very simple exercise, not a lot of direction to it. Sit down and write out what you would want in your relationship. Now, what I don't want you to do is say, I don't want. This is not I want to avoid this. That's not what this is about. The vision is where I want to go to. So when I was learning to drive my car, my dad said, never look where you don't want to go, because you'll go there. My friends who are golfers, and I am absolutely not, tell me that they don't want to look at where they don't want the ball to go, because that's where they're going to put the ball. So we're going to look at where we want to go, what marriage you want to create. So just spend some time writing down the elements that would make up the relationship, the marriage that you would want, given where you are now. And we all know a lot more about this relationship thing than we think. So think about what it is that you would like out of your marriage. What would it look like? How would it feel? What would you do? And so then what I want you to do, once you've created that, is if you're doing it with yourself, by yourself, just write that out in a vision statement. This is the marriage that I would like. If you are doing it with your spouse, sit down together and compare notes. And you'll notice that there are lots that will be in common. And that's easy just to go, okay, we both agree on that. The others, you're going to go, some of them you're going to go, I didn't ever know you wanted that. How could we get to there? Some you're going to go, I hadn't thought about that, but I want that too. How could we move that forward? And so it begins to be a discussion point about each of those points to see why you might have put that in there, what would be important, and how might you get there. This is an action plan, a vision statement. Now, I've worked with many companies to get their vision statement as an organization. And sometimes I'll go back later on, I'll go, hey, where's your vision statement? And they go hunt it out of some manila folder way back in the file. And I'm like, whoever saw this? How did it ever help to have a vision if you don't keep it in front of you? So this is a vision statement that you'll be developing over these next weeks to create the marriage that you want, first by building the foundation. We're going to dig down and understand what that foundation is about. And then by setting or resetting, depending on what's been there, the cornerstones that will then fit into your vision. Okay, so that's what's on your plate. Do the rating exercise, 1 to 10. Figure out what would move you up a couple. Marriage vision statement. What would you like out of a relationship? If you're doing it by yourself, just write that out as your vision statement of your ideal marriage. And you want to put it as we in the present, right? Not we will, but we do. Even if you're not doing it right now, because you're going to quickly add those in. If you're doing it with your spouse, compare those notes. Put them all together that already fit. Talk about the others. Create your vision statement. And then come back next week and we'll talk about the foundation of building a great marriage. Thank you so much for being here. Now, the one difficult thing about this is you probably have some questions, and I would have a hard time knowing what those questions are, and this isn't an easy format for doing that. So if you will send any questions you have to lee@leebaucom.com, lee@leebaucom.com, just put in there question for the St. Francis series or whatever you want in the subject line, and we can have that as an ongoing part. And you can do that every single week, lee@leebaucom.com. Now, the other thing, some people have talked about being interested in finding my books. Easiest way to find all the books is to go to the Amazon book page, and you can find that by going to thriveology.com/books. That's thriveology.com/books. And you can check it out there. You don't have to buy them there. You can order them at any bookstore. If you want to support local bookstores, that's great. If you want to just hit buy on Amazon, that's great. If you want to go to Barnes & Noble, that's great. But it'll let you see the books and give you a feel for what's there. And also, you can check out my podcasts at savethemarriage.com or savethemarriagepodcast.com and thriveologypodcast.com. And I look forward to being with you again next week as we build the foundation for your great marriage.